Hello, my name is Marcello, and today I'm going to show you how to pre-render with Vue. This is going to be part one of a two-part series where we're going to be discussing pre-rendering and SEO with Vue. So in today's video, I have modified a website written by Eldon, and there will be a link down in the video description below with his original source. So here is our home page. We have a couple of animated elements, a little bit of text, some icons, and we have two images in this slider. We also have another page that dynamically loads data from a server, and we have another page that is essentially an about page, but later on in the SEO video we are going to prevent search engines from indexing this site. So let's jump into the code. Alright, so now that we're in our project, let's go ahead and install some dependencies. So the first thing that I want to install is HTTP server. What this does is it'll serve a local folder on port 8080. So I'm going to say npm i-g http-server. And then I am going to install our pre-rendering plugin. So I'll do npm i prerender-spa-plugin, and we're going to save that as a development dependency. Alright, so now that that's installed, let's go ahead and open up vueconfig.js. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is set up Webpack. And there's two different ways that you can set up Webpack. One is to create an object, or you can use it as a function. Personally, I prefer using it as a function. If you prefer using the object method, feel free to use the object method. It won't really make any difference. So I'm going to go ahead and create our function and pass config as an argument. And then here, the first thing that I'm going to do is say config.plugins equals, and then I'm going to spread the existing plugins. And then I am going to spread a variable called plugins that we're going to now create. So we're going to say const plugins, and that's going to be an empty array. So now what I'm going to do is say if process environment node environment is triple equal to production. So the first thing that I'm going to import is join from path. Then I'm going to import our pre-rendering plugin. And then just as a shortcut, I'm also going to create our renderer here, which is going to be from the pre-renderer plugin. And then I'm going to use the Puppeteer renderer. There are other renderers available. Link in the description below with the documentation on that. Alright, so now that we have everything imported, we are going to add this into our plugins. So I'm going to say plugins.unshift new pre-render plugin. And then that's going to accept an object. In this object, we have to specify where our output folder is. So we'll specify our static directory, and that's going to be our current directory and then dist. And then we need to set up our routes. For now, I'm just going to have it as index, so just a /. And then we'll need to set up our renderer, which will also take an object as an argument. Let's fix our name there. And then for now, I'm not going to provide anything to our renderer. We're just going to leave it blank. So now I'm going to run npm run build. And now that's complete, I'm going to split my terminal and run http-server./dist. Now we can see that's running on port 8080. So if I go ahead and open up port 8080, we can see our website. Now let's double check that this worked. So if it did not work, what we would expect is that our index.html in dist would match our HTML from public. So let's go ahead and compare these side by side. And here we can see that all of our information did load in. If I scroll down a little bit further and run a formatter, we can see all of the HTML that's been generated for us. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of both of those index files and save. So let's add another route. So if I open up my router, I can see that I have another route called /dynamic. I'm going to add that here underneath routes. I'm going to kill our HTTP server and then run npm run build again. Alright, so let's see what is in our dist. So here we can see that there's a folder called dynamic with an index.html. So it did generate our dynamic route. However, if I open it up and say format document with HTML again, we can see that it's just a blank table. There's no data. So what can we do? Back underneath our Vue config, inside of our renderer, we can pass it a couple different options. We can do render after time, which is not recommended, which will give the renderer a certain amount of time to load the page before it actually extracts the HTML and continues on creating our pre-rendered page. However, since that's not recommended, I'm going to go a different route. I am going to say render after document event, and then we'll pass that a name. So I'm going to say render complete. What this will do is wait to hear a document event called render complete, and then it knows that the rendering is complete. So let's go ahead and add that into our home page. So underneath our source, open up View, Home, and then here underneath Mounted, I'm going to remove the console log that I had there because it's not needed. And then I'm going to say document.dispatch event, and then we'll create a new event whose name is going to be render complete. I'll go ahead and save that. And then here underneath our dynamic content view, I'm going to just go ahead and copy this dispatch event. We can see that when it's mounted, we're requesting data, and then we're setting loading to false. So after the data has been fetched, we'll go ahead and dispatch the render complete event. I'm going to go ahead and put it underneath next tick with loading, just so that way it gives it just an extra second to load data in. Alright, so now let's go ahead and run build again. And now that we've built, let's run our HTTP server, and let's look at the network tab. I'm going to go ahead and reload. And then here under the network tab, I'm going to load everything. Here we can see the document that first gets sent. If we click on that and go to preview, we can see that there is some data loaded into it. Now if we go to our dynamic route, wait for it to load, we can also see that all of our data has been loaded into our table. And if we look at our dynamic route, we can see all of the flights departing from Denver, my home airport, whether they're scheduled, in-flight, canceled. Along with this, it also will re-update all of this data when the page is loaded. So not only is it cached when it builds the original file, when it builds the pre-rendered file, but it also updates when you load the page, just as you'd expect. So let's take another look at another quick example. Let's say that for some reason, none of my data is getting preloaded into my dynamic route. So in this case, I just moved my dispatch event before the API call is complete. So when we rebuild, we'll see that we'll have a dist folder, go into dynamic index, format document with HTML, and we can see once again we have a blank table. Well, what we can do is from our renderer, we can tell it to be headless, set to false, and then we can say render after time, and I'm going to set this to 5 hours. So it's going to wait 5 hours before it renders the next route. Now in this case, I haven't set my maximum concurrent routes to 1, so actually every single one of my routes would be rendering at the same time, so it'd give me 5 hours in total. If I wanted to change that, I could set max concurrent routes to 1, and what that would do is render each route one after the next. So for example, it would only render index, then when index was complete rendering, then it would render dynamic. So let's go ahead and see this in action. First, I'm going to replace this and make dynamic the first route that's going to get rendered. Now when we run npm run build, so let me comment out render after document event and run build. Alright, so now the renderer has opened up a Chromium instance, and here we can preview all of the data that is going to be pre-rendered. I can go ahead and close the browser window, and it's going to fail. So I see that my content is loading, which means that I must have my dispatch event in the wrong place, which, as we both know, was something I did intentionally. So now we'll put the dispatch event back into the right place. We figured out the issue, so we can remove render after time and add back in our render after document event. Alright, so let's take a look at another example. So here on our website, we have a page called no index. So if we go ahead and open that up, we can see that it is a V card with a slider allowing us to control which element is being shown, and then we also have this next button. So let's go ahead and look at the code for that page. So that's noindex.view. So we are iterating through all of the slider elements, and then we're controlling whether they're shown or not with the VF. So what do you think is going to happen when we try to pre-render this page? That's right, it's not going to be SEO searchable because there's not going to be all of our information that we want on that page to be loaded. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like. So in order to have this page rendered, we have to create our document dispatch event listener, and that's going to be render complete. So let's go ahead and add in that dispatch request, and then here underneath view config, we're going to add in our route, which is no index. We're going to save it. Let's go ahead and run an npm run build. And let's take a look at our no index file. So I'm going to do F1, format document, format it as HTML. And here, the only thing that we see is element 1 is showing. we were to run our HTTP server and inspect our document, look at what no index provides, once again, we can see that only element 1 is showing. So how can we fix this? We don't want to change this code and make it display everything all the time. Well, what we could do is underneath our configuration, we can add an inject. So there are two things. First off, underneath our renderer, we can add in a inject property. And I'm going to call this is prerendering. And then we can assign that a value. So we can say what we're going to inject. And I'm just going to set this to true. So what this code here will do is set window.isPrerendering equal to true. So let's take a look at this in real time. So what I'm going to do is comment out render complete and bring back in our 5-hour render time. And then I'm going to go ahead and run our build. Google Chrome is opened, so I'm going to go ahead and inspect our console. And let's make sure that window.isPrerendering is set, and it is set to true. So what this allows us to do is create some custom cases underneath our noIndex. So what I'm going to do underneath noIndex is create a computed property, say is prerendering, and this is going to return, make sure that we have a window object, and say window.isPrerendering. And so what this will do is just return whether we're in the pre-rendered state or not. Here, what I can do is say create a new element. In this case, since we're just outputting some data, I'm just going to create a paragraph. And I'm going to only show the paragraph if we are pre-rendering. Then I'll wrap our existing for loop inside of another div tag and say v-else. Then if we are pre-rendering, I'm going to change this to a div real quick. Let's iterate through all of our items inside of our random word sequence. So we'll say v4 I in random word sequence, and then the key will be I. So if I go ahead and save that, run npm run serve, we can see that our page looks identical. But now if we were to run npm run build after uncommenting render after event and recommenting out render after time, we can now go into our dist folder, look at our noIndex route. So here we can see that I did something wrong because all of our subdivs are blank. So let's see what I did wrong. So what am I doing wrong here? Well, we are dispatching the render complete event under created. So what we'll do is we'll switch this over to mounted, and then we'll also tell it to run this on the next tick. So the reason why this is an issue is because we're not giving the DOM enough time to update. By waiting on next tick and moving it to mounted, we know that the component or view is mounted and that we've given it enough time to fully refresh the DOM. So let's go ahead and run npm run build again. And now if we look at our pre-rendered noIndex route, we can see that all of our data has been preloaded, which makes our site more SEO friendly. So now that we're ready for actual production, I'm going to go ahead and remove my commented out render after time. And then I'm also going to remove max concurrent routes and headless. So what this will do is we won't see the browser window pop up when it's rendering, and it will also render no index, dynamic, and index all at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and save these routes, close out of my index.html, and run the build again. Everything has been built. If we look inside of our dist, we can see our dynamic route, our index, and our no index. They are all populated correctly. So I can go ahead and configure my web app routes. So here is my static web app route for Azure static website. If you're using Firebase or any other provider, it's pretty much the same process. Just look into their documentation for configuring routes. In this case, I have 3 routes that are pre-rendered. However, only 2 of them are not index or are in subfolders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new property, and we're going to say route for dynamic, and we are going to rewrite that to /dynamic/index.html. And then we are going to do the same thing for no index. And now what will happen is when the request comes into /dynamic, Azure, Firebase, or Netlify, whatever hosting provider that you're using, will then go inside of the dynamic folder and use the index.html that was generated by the pre-renderer. Alright, and that's all there is to rendering, and that's all there is to pre-rendering with Vue. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help out. Follow along for part 2, where we're going to discuss implementing SEO.